In today's video, I'll go over how to fit a 1000 watt KirbEbike conversion kit. So what's in the box? The main pieces of kit are the motor wheel itself, an LCD display and thumb throttle, the smart controller and battery charger. The battery itself comes separately for safety reasons. They deliver it separately, so it'll probably come a couple of days after the main delivery. I started off the build with the motor wheel, so I took the tyre and the inner tube off the donor bike and fitted it straight onto the motor wheel itself. I haven't recorded that because I'm assuming most of you can already do that. The next step was to unscrew all the bolts, washers, bits and pieces that were already attached. There's a plastic piece attached on the motor wheel that it's quite important to remove, else your wheel will struggle to fit in to the dropouts. At this point, you take the brake disc off your old bike and screw it onto this motor wheel, which in theory is quite straightforward. The problem I had was a lot of the screws were rounding off on the old bike, so I couldn't take the brake disc off. At this point, it was more straightforward for me just to buy a disc brake separately. It only cost around £7 or £8. It did end up putting the project back a day or so, as I didn't anticipate the problem coming up in the first place. So what should have been a 5-minute job was anything but. The last step here is to install the cassette, the gears themselves. This was a lot more straightforward. You just have to make sure you've got the right tools. So the KirbEbike kit comes with a cassette removal tool, which is pretty handy. You'll also need a chain whip and spanner. The biggest problem that you might come across here is actually removing the cassettes off the donor bike. So one tip is to make sure whilst you're using the chain whip and the spanner on the donor bike, just make sure the wheel's upright, so you're using gravity in your favour and you're kind of leaning into it. It'll make it that bit easier to get the cassette off the wheel. Now at this point, the motor wheel is more or less ready to go straight onto the bike. You just have to start adding in washers depending on what the measurement of your dropouts is on your bike. I actually didn't end up adding these washers in here because once I started to fit the wheel into the bike dropouts, I realised I didn't need them. If you do need them, just make sure that they're not too wide so that they end up pushing the cassette against the motor. Now, when you get to fitting the tyre onto your bike, it's trial and error. You just have to play around with it enough until it starts to sit snug into those dropouts. Assuming you've checked your bike's dropouts before buying the kit, you shouldn't have a problem fitting this, but it will take a bit of time. I actually pulled the frame apart slightly and that helped a lot in terms of helping the wheel fall into the slots. I've then used a hammer and padding to very lightly tap it into the slots. Probably should have used a rubber mallet really, but there you go. At this stage, I'm happy with how the tyre is fitting into the dropouts, and I'm just tightening the bolt on the cassette side, make sure it's really tight, really nice and safe. Then probably the most important part of the build is fitting the torque arm. So beneath that bolt there, you can see I've already fitted part of the torque arm, the smaller part, and I'm going to fit the long arm in here. What I'll do is I'll tighten that up with an Allen key and a nut. And on the left hand side, you can see there's a slit on the long arm. Just there. What I'll do is the final part of the torque arm kit is like a flexible piece of metal. So I'll thread that through a slit in the long part of the torque arm and around the frame, and then you can tighten that with a screwdriver. It does take a while. I actually ended up using a piece of cloth between that flexible metal part and the frame just so I wasn't damaging the frame and the paintwork on the frame. This part of the kit is so important because you have to remember these bikes aren't designed with, motor wheels in mind. So the torque arm acts as a support to stop that motor wheel from, because a motor wheel is constantly wanting to come out of the frame, of the dropouts, the torque arm is helping stop that from happening. Once you've got to this stage, you've probably got the hardest part of the builds out of the way. So the next thing I did was install the battery holder, which really nice and straightforward. It just goes where the bottle holder would normally go on a bike. 2 screws and an Allen key, and you'll have that fitted. Obviously, you have to be conscious of the fact that your battery's gonna have to slide on and off of that. So when you're fitting it, I've got a 20-inch frame here, and it gives me a lot of space to work with. But if you've got less space, then you're gonna have to slide the holder up and down as appropriate. The controller bag, nice and straightforward to fit. It's a Velcro fit, and it's just undo the zip and you put the controller in there. Installing the display screen itself is easy to do as well. It's straightforward. You just, again, Allen keys, make sure it's on the middle of the bars and tighten it up. It actually comes attached to the throttle, which obviously also goes in the handlebars. I've personally placed my throttle on the left hand side, but that's, I guess, personal preference. Now you can start to connect the wires. So this is, again, really straightforward. The wires are color coded, so green goes to green, red goes to red, yellow to yellow, and so on and so forth. You just have to make sure that you're putting the wires in correct. So there's normally an arrow on each side, and you match up the arrows so that the pins are going into the right slots, wire to wire. I've then slid in the battery, which this is a 16 amp battery. What's good about this battery is you don't need the key to put it onto the frame. You just kind of slide it in and it clicks in, whereas some other e-bikes I've had in the past, you do need a key to put it into the frame and to take it out of the frame. At this point, it's probably a good idea to test the throttle out before you actually fit it to the handlebar. So as you can see here, that's going slowly. I think that was has a level 1. I then switch it to level 5. And there you go, there's a massive difference in speed. When I attached the thumb throttle, I moved the gears and the brake levers to the right slightly, as you can see there, just to make it easier for me to actually press the throttle whilst I'm riding. I don't really want to be reaching across the brake lever to hit the throttle. So some of you might be asking at this point, how do you adjust the settings, the speed, the units from, miles per hour to kilometers per hour, or vice versa? You simply turn it on with the power button at the bottom, and then immediately after that you press the plus and the minus button together. Once you do that, you'll be presented with this screen here. So it's a flashing 01 and a P. You press plus to get to 02, and you can see there it says kilometers per hour, I think that is. So once you press the information button on the side, you can then press plus or minus to switch between them 2 units. If you then press information, you'll go back to the numbers. So 03 I'm on now. I think that's the voltage, which you can play around with, but I personally didn't. If you keep going up, 04, 05, 06, 07, 08. So on 08, you've got the speed limit. So the max speed limit on this is 62 miles per hour. Obviously, a 1000 watt e-bike isn't going to go 62 miles per hour. Again, you can play around with that, set it to whatever speed you want. Now for the speed test. This first speed test was on a flat road. There might have been a slight incline uphill. It was more or less flat. And it pretty comfortably reached 24 miles per hour, just there or thereabouts. I then did a hill climb test on a really steep hill, and it was pretty impressive. It got me to about 14 miles per hour, and even though I'm fairly light, it's still pretty impressive considering how steep the hill was. So my overall thoughts on this piece of kit are as follows. It's a good piece of kit for the price, does the job, fairly easy to set up. There was an issue on the first day where it kept dropping to 5 miles per hour for some reason, and the battery wasn't dead. I contacted the company. They got back to me, I think, the day after, and said that as part of the setup, you sometimes have to do a machine learning step, which was really straightforward. And after that, the bike's been working fine. I'm trying to think of any negatives, but honestly, the kit's been really well thought out in how it's been built. Some of you might have noticed that I've not fitted the brake levers onto this kit. That's because this is a hydraulic disc brake bike, and I don't think the brake levers that come with the kit are compatible, but I've been braking fine without them anyway. I didn't fit the PAS system either, but that was more personal preference than anything. In summary, I'd recommend buying the kit if you know your way around the bike. And if you found this video useful, please remember to like, comment and subscribe.